with We Are the Parent with my man, Sam Bradford, on the all-new sound of Buffalo. It's Power 96.5 and Mix 1080 WUFO. Hey, Lee, here we go. It's Saturday morning. It's 10 a.m. Y'all know what it is. It's Saturday morning at 10 a.m. That means it's We the Parents. So those of you who are joining us on our new time, remember we just moved to this 3 weeks ago. We are here with our 85th We the Parent show. Y'all hear that, everybody? This is our 85th We the Parent show. So, I remember Charlie Fisher used to do that all the time, always count how many shows they were. And so I have a lot of respect for just keeping track of history, making sure that, we know where we are in our own process. But everybody, we appreciate you joining us here at Power 96.5 WUFO, 1080 AM, 96.5 FM. Listen, we are here every Saturday morning because we have prioritized our children and our future. We the Parents is a commitment by us to make sure we have an ongoing intergenerational conversation about our children, about where we want to be at, about a vision for our children. So for those of people who are joining us, know that in our mind, we want to make sure our children live in a better world than we live in, that we make the world better than we found it, that we are, challenging ourselves, challenging those people in leadership, challenging our children, all to build on the foundation of the people who came before them. So we are here every week. I'm joined here with my normal co-host.
Good morning, everybody. It's a wonderful morning. We got a really good show for you guys. I hope you guys enjoy it because it's going to be really impactful and really important.
And that is Mr. Emmanuel Wafford, who's also doing the producing for Facebook. So if you want to join us on Facebook, you can go to the Samuel Wafford page, the We the Parents Show page, or the We the Parents of West New York page. Any of those pages will get you the Facebook. And if you want to make comments on Facebook, you welcome to make comments, and we will take them. But this is also a call-in show. You can call us at 837-1112, 837-1112. And I already know this is going to be a powerful show, because, we got a guest co-host with us, and just the preliminary conversation we had to prep for the show was really let me know this brother is serious and he right on point. Let's welcome Brother Joel Moore. How you doing today, Brother Joel?
Good morning, Sam. I appreciate you having me out today. I'm Joel Moore, one of the attorneys in the area. I'm excited to be here today. I am excited to have this conversation. This is a pivotal conversation, making sure that our young people are well educated and looking into why they aren't, in an effort to fix those things and uplift our community. So I think this is a great conversation. Thank you for having me.
And I love that perspective you're taking, because we're gonna bring up some serious issues and some concerns we have, but it's in an effort to fix them. As an effort to make them better. There are people who came before us. As you know, we always do every show in honor of our elder, our sage advisor, who is now our ancestor, Brother Lloyd Hargrave, who, really left a legacy and a foundation for us to build on. But the goal was to make it better. And so one of the things you have to do when you're making it better, you have to be honest about the way it is. And so one of the challenges we have is people don't want to be honest about the way it is. So in preparing for this show, me and Emmanuel was going over, this what is going on in Buffalo, right? And so we wanted there are 3 or 4 issues that we're going to talk about. And in the course of talking about these issues, we wanted to be clear about why is this happening, and it's happening in Buffalo, and it's not necessarily happening in the same place in other areas, right? So we came up with a term called the Buffalo Complex, right? Let's talk about what this Buffalo Complex is. And so if you got some thoughts on it, please call in. But before we get into our show for the day, we need to give you some updates for some battles that we were in. You know that ultimately we take on the challenges and we fight to make things happen. So last week we were talking to you about this concern we had about the coaches in our school system, what was going on particularly at Bennett High School, but just the whole idea of coaches in general. Why don't you give us an update on where we at with the coaches' challenges that we were outlining last week?
So Bennett, that problem got solved. We were able to fight and win on that. But the overall coaching.
Don't say that's that fast, So 2 weeks in a row, we had these issues that we brought to you as a community. And because we brought them to you as a community, we work with people like the Urban Think Tank, the District Parent Coordinating Council, and other community groups to deal with the issue. We pushed back, and we won on that issue. You know what I'm saying? So on that concern about having coaches who were not qualified, we had 2 coaches who had no experience at all. They had never coached football before, and they wanted to come and coach varsity level athletes at Bennett High School. And they had a right to do it because the teacher's contract says that if you are a certified teacher who is, and you also have CPR and first aid training, you get the right to become the coach of a team strictly based on your seniority as a teacher, independent of whether you even qualified to coach the sport, independent of any experience you have. You get that. And so in this case at Bennett, we had 3 coaches who had experienced coaches, have been working there 7-8 years, who were going to get knocked out of their position. One for a teacher who's been teaching 27 years, had never coached football, more than likely was trying to just pad their pension and, getting a salary, and then another one who had just started coaching, never coached football, was going to knock experienced people out of their position because they were not teachers, right? And so we have this issue that we got to deal with. So in that case, it got solved. That is not happening. That pushback, was successful. But you saying, what's the bigger issue?
Yeah, so just the overall theme of the show being a Buffalo complex, we have a MOU in place in Buffalo about teachers having to be coaches that is really only happening in Buffalo. So what we're going to do, and we're going to continue this fight till it's won, is we don't want to no longer hire coaches based on the fact that they're teachers and based on the fact that they have seniority. We want, like everybody else around us, like everybody else in the country, to be able to hire the most qualified coach to coach our children in the sport they're playing. And it's football, basketball, soccer, volleyball. I don't care what the sport is, but we want the most qualified coach who has the most experience coaching, who can put our kids in a better position to be successful, not only as athletes, but as student athletes. Because as you see with this campaign we're going to launch, sports has a way deeper impact than people want to give it credit for. And when you have the right coaches in front of the children, it makes a lifelong impact. So that's what we're going to continue fighting for. Be on the lookout. We're going to be launching that campaign, and we're going to be fighting for it for the foreseeable future till we win on it, because our children deserve better coaches.
And we need your support as a community, because we need to win on it before August, right? So we need to be in this negotiation with the Board of Education between now and August. And let me just make this point. So we talked about this concept of the Buffalo complex, right? So I'm asking everybody, here's the first example of the Buffalo complex. Joe, give me your position on it, what I'm saying? But the listeners, give me your position as well. Why is it that only in Buffalo, why is it that no other school district in West New York, no other school district in the whole state has a provision in their contract where certified teachers get to be coaches over certified coaches? Why would nobody else would do that and Buffalo do that? So what's your thought about that? We calling that item number 1 on the Buffalo complex.
So this is extremely interesting, and to give you guys some background, I am a former attorney for the Buffalo Public School System. So some of my perspective is internal. I've always thought that was a travesty, and it's interesting that you all brought that up. With regard to sports, when people are participating in these sports, it's not just athletics, guys. It is an educational experience. People develop confidence when they're doing these things. They develop the ability to interact with other individuals. They develop respect, not respect just for themselves, respect for how they interact with their teammates, respect for how they interact with the other team. They develop the ability to win, develop the ability to lose, and how to go about experiencing those. Sports is a microcosm of life in that respect. And so this is an opportunity for these young people to learn some things. You want to have the best coaches in place to help develop these skill sets. And I submit to you that while math and science, all of these things are extremely pivotal, sports and that experience can have a extremely positive influence on young people and their development in some of the same ways that you get from these traditional curriculum. So you want the best coach in place just like you want the best teacher in place, because you want the best experience for your student, your child overall. So this isn't something you just want to glaze over. This is an extremely important facet among other facets that help develop the child, and we need to make sure that we have the best coaches in place to help the children develop. So I'm glad you guys are talking about that.
And so the question that we asking you as an audience, why is that happening in Buffalo, but it don't happen nowhere else? I mean, what's going on with this Buffalo complex that we allow people to do things that nobody else will allow people to do? One of the things that we're going to be talking about as kind of an ongoing theme is, as we build on the foundation of those who came before us, is what are some of the battles that we've won and what is the battles of the next generation, right? Mm-hmm. And so what I'm going to suggest is, for example, when we came in, I remember, working with Lloyd, when we would come into schools had got to the place when we would come in as parents, they would stop us at the front desk. We had to sit there in the office and wait to be escorted through the building. You wasn't welcome in the building. So I know one of the first battles we took on was the right to have a parent room in the building. A place where we're welcome, we're part of the school-based planning, shared decision-making process, and we won that battle. That's something that's in place. We won the battle when we first started working. Every school didn't have an after-school program. We had these supplemental education services, so some schools had an after-school program, some schools didn't. Some schools had an after-school program that was 1 day or 2 days or 3 days. Some had it 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. And because kids are bused in this community, we realized that created such an inconvenience for parents that we fought to make sure every school had an after-school program, and they were all at least 2 hours, right? 5 days a week, 2 hours a day. So those are battles that we won. I mean, I can come up with more battles we won, but those are examples of things that this generation don't have to fight for because we have to fight because we already fought those battles. But this coaching issue is a battle for this generation. We got to win on this issue. We've been fighting that issue with the Buffalo Teachers Federation for 9 years. No, 2009. So that's what? 12 years, right? This is 2021, 11 years, right? 11 years we've been fighting that battle. 12 years, 22, 21. 12 years we've been fighting that battle. So we need this generation to come up and to use your brain trust to figure out how we win on that battle. Another one of those issues and I'm going to say the bigger issue, right? That of this generation is this issue of busing. Let's have a conversation about this. Is 2021 when the generation before us fought to get busing. They fought to get busing with the idea that our kids were in schools in our own communities and they were not getting the resources. They were not, getting the academic attention, to progress them academically. So the idea was, since the white schools in the, South Buffalo and North Buffalo, were getting, more resources and they had better academic outcomes, that if we bust our kids to those schools, our kids would get better results. So here we are. That started in 1976. I was in that class that got bused. I got bused from the east side of Buffalo on Barthel to South Buffalo to Pawnee Parkway to School 27, Hillary Park Academy. And so here we are now, almost, 40 some odd years later. And the question is, did that work for us? Did that get us better results? You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And so as I look, it didn't get us no better results. We bust kids now, from failing schools, from their own neighborhoods we're failing schools at, to failing schools in the North Buffalo and South Buffalo. I'm suggesting at this point that we've lost more by busing our kids than we gained. Mm-hmm. That actually, because now parents we live in a city, only 50% of the people got cars. You know what I'm saying? We live in the third poorest city in the country, the second highest child poverty rate. Parents don't have the resources to go check on their kid across town. And if you got kids that go to multiple schools, that go to different, you just don't have the same relationship to the school that you had when it was in your neighborhood. So what I'm suggesting is that one of the battles of this generation have to be to overcome the consequences of busing our kids. We spend $53 million busing our kids, through the city every day. You know what I'm saying? So the question is, from y'all perspective, you know what I'm saying, how do y'all feel about busing? Do you think this is an issue that your generation is ultimately going to have to deal with?
So I think that's an interesting framing of the situation. And one thing that struck me when you were talking about it is the notion that you were, or you're talking about kids who were bused from one point of the city to another, but the school where they lived around was failing, and the school where they ended up was failing. So if you look at what the point of busing was in the first place, it was to ensure that kids from underprivileged areas with lesser schools, if you will, however you want to define that, ended up in a school that was performing well and were given the opportunity to interact with those teachers, those kids, in an effort to lift the entire system. it does you no good if you are moving kids simply from one school that's underperforming to another, because a key part of that that goal is out the window, right? So everything we look at, we have to look at our gains and we have to look at our losses to decide whether we should move forward with something or not. In a case where, again, the entire premise is to put kids in a school that is performing well, so hopefully that influence and permeates down to them and their family, you lose for your first step. There's no point in your first step if it's already a failing school. So I think one of the observations I've always had is we know that we have this two-tier system when we have these very high-performing schools.
Yes,
we
sir.
have our city honors, we have our techs, we
That's
have
right.
these, which are wonderful institutions, state
Olmsted,
and nationally
yeah.
rated institutions,
right.
and then we have a second tier. I was fortunate enough to attend Howard University for undergrad, and I had conversations with other students who did, and it turns out that two-tier system is not just Buffalo. That is Detroit. That is Chicago. Are these other cities as well. So they've also, that's certainly New York City, right? We know that they have their system, and people covet those, right? If you can get your kid in the city honors, you're doing well. If you can't get them in the city honors or the text, you're sending them to private school if you have those resources. We have to stop looking at the system in terms of two-tier. We need to have advanced placement available for students across the board.
That's right.
We need to be looking and saying, no matter what school I send my child to, this is going to be a nurturing environment for development. We can't start talking about busing as an effective methodology until we know that the school that a child will end up at is a performing school.
Yes, sir.
You've got to take this thing in order, and it's not being done in order. It completely negates itself if we're only sending them from one bad school to another. All the other benefits are out the window.
So you saying your generation, this is an issue your generation has to pick up.
Absolutely.
What's your thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
it's interesting. I'm a shout out to my mentor, Mr. Hare, because he made this point to me. He said when they integrated schools, African Americans weren't asking for integration; they were asking for equality, because from his premise, African Americans could effectively educate themselves if they had equal resources to the schools that where the white kids went. And so he said integrating schools didn't solve the problem because all they wanted were equity. So he said we could effectively teach our children if we had the books we needed, if we had the resources we needed, if we had everything that the other schools had. And so then he talks about also when they did integrate schools, in order to entice Caucasian kids to come to inner city, they had to make these magnet schools.
That's right.
So now the schools in which the children are growing up near, are in the community, become better, but they can't attend them because now they're being bussed away from them. So now we have this system where the Olmsted is in the middle of the Langfield project.
That's right.
It's in the middle of the Langfield project.
That's right.
How many children from the Langfield do you think attend that school?
That's a great question. You know what I'm saying?
And so now you have kids being bused to a failing school, but when they wake up in the morning and look across the street, it's one of the most high-performing schools in their city. And then we ask ourselves, is busing being effective when if we could have got the equity and the resources that everybody else had, Olmsted could have been a school for those kids in the Langfield and been flourishing because we would have had equity and resources. So I think we definitely need to revisit this busing idea, and we also need to revisit the idea that if we have equity among the resources in African American communities and Caucasian communities and whatever communities, we can effectively educate our own.
As a pop.
No, this is really interesting. Excellent point on Olmsted. And I was going to say, when I talk to my generation about what schools they attended, particularly ones that went to City Honors, you can backtrack this thing, right? And so for my group, the City Honors kids came from the gifted program at Olmsted, I believe. Right?
Always.
Matter of fact, when Namir graduated from City Honors, it was a whole Olmsted group that was their own group within City Honors. That's right.
And so you can go back and trace this lineage to where it starts, right? Now there's a thinking about where it starts that is these are high performing students, which is why we put them in the gifted program. That's what I want to place a pin in and discuss, because there's a presumption that high performing kids placed in the gifted program produce. I submit to you that we have to ask the question, explore the notion of whether it's because these kids are high performing or because they're invested in at that point that they ultimately produce.
That's right.
I read a recent article, and there was a program, Howard's involved in it, Harvard, some of the other Ivy League schools, and they set up a program where kids from underprivileged communities throughout the nation, and Buffalo Public Schools is participating in this, could take college level classes at these Ivy League schools online and see what their development ultimately was. And these kids had often been, told just societally that they, couldn't perform at this level and hadn't thought much about college. What you found was they got into it, they loved it, they performed extremely well by and large in these Ivy League schools. And in their mind, again, they would have never imagined attending a Harvard or a Yale or a Howard or something like that, right?
Think about the expectations you have of a child once you put them in a program like that.
Exactly. You've placed expectations on them, you've given them the resources, and what happened? They produced.
That's right.
And so if you track that back to an Olmsted, it's not that you're looking or should be looking at gifted students. Those gifted students perform because you invested in them. That's what you need to be doing for all your students, and I think you'll find the output 8 years later, 12 years later, is that you get a great performing student because you put the time in early on, and you continue to put the time in throughout the entire process.
And this is the conversation with your generation. This is a fight that you have to take on, because when we look at what happened in our generation, part of what we're describing as the Buffalo complex is, Buffalo complex is people go along to get along. People don't want to rock the boat. People don't want to rub up against the resistance of, progress. When you progress on the forward edge. That means you're rubbing up against the status quo. You're rubbing up against the way people benefit from the way it is now, right? And so if people don't want to rock the boat, they want to kind of be comfortable, they don't do that. So here's an example. At Olmsted, right now, there's only one place in Buffalo where you have a requirement that if you live in that neighborhood, you get a neighborhood preference and you get a sibling preference. So in North Buffalo, the wealthiest neighborhood in our community, if you live in North Buffalo and you have a child that goes to Olmsted, you get a neighborhood preference and a sibling preference. Nowhere else in Buffalo. Just that part of Buffalo, you know what I'm saying? So that's a North Buffalo. So that's everybody else Buffalo complex where North Buffalo is being treated differently. So look at the Olmsted Middle School, which is in Langfield. I remember when Patricia Elliott said, wait a minute, I live right around the corner from that. Should I get I want a neighborhood preference for my daughter I got one daughter in Olmsted. I want my other daughter to be able to get in Olmsted with a neighborhood and sibling preference. They said, oh no, that's just for the little Olmsted. That's just for the North Buffalo Olmsted. So why should it be any different? Well, again, because this Buffalo complex. The fight that you have to get into, those people with means and resources are willing to go to court, fight, do whatever they got to do to get that change. When you live in a third poorest city in the country, you know what I'm saying, and you got parents who don't have access to those kind of resources, who are working hourly jobs, who cannot necessarily just get up and go and get into a battle for their children, you see the result is this glaring difference between two Olmsted schools. Why don't the full Olmsted school, from kindergarten to 12th grade, have a neighborhood preference and a sibling preference? Because the difference in location of where they at, the difference in resources where they at. It is on your generation now to pick up that battle and say, are we going to live with that or are we not going to live with that? All right? So, two other things that you said. You made a wonderful point about advanced placement courses. I want to talk about that because right now there is a great piece of legislation in the state legislature on course access, a wonderful Crystal Peoples-Stokes sponsored this legislation to make sure that we have, because here's another Buffalo complex. If you go to the suburban school district, every single school has advanced placement courses. Why do you think every single school has advanced placement courses if you're in the suburbs?
Because they're preparing you for college.
You literally, this is real talk, and you would know better than most, Joe. You cannot get into a top college or university if you don't take calculus and you don't take, advanced math, by the time you get into the sciences and the math, if by the time you get into 12th grade, if you're not able to get up to the college level math, you know what I'm saying, you're not going to get a top college or university. Everybody who knows that in order to get into calculus in 12th grade, what do you have to take in 8th grade?
Algebra.
You have to take algebra while you're in elementary school. You can't take algebra in high school. So if you don't have an advanced placement course in elementary school, which means you gotta start thinking about what your children are taking to school when they get in middle school. If you don't have a plan, if your middle school don't have a advanced placement course, then you almost are already out of the conversation and getting into a top college university by the time you get to high school. And so, you have thought about that?
Well, yeah, I definitely do. So, with AP courses, there's a couple things that come with them, and I'll share my particular experience. I think I took AP Government at Park School. Shout out to Park School, where I was fortunate enough to attend. AP Government was is ultimately, when I look back, what planted the seed for me being an attorney now, right? Those discussions with my teacher, Mr. Dombrowski, shout out to him as well, set the tone that would ultimately come to fruition later on. Now, I took the other program we had. We could go over to Damon College, which is right around the corner, and we could sit in those classes. Now, I'll tell you about my AP experience and my Damon College experience. I did well in some courses. I didn't necessarily do so well. Physics for me at that time was difficult. I took over at Damon, but here's what it allowed me to do. It allowed me to spread my wings a little bit. It allowed me to reach for something and see some expectations that allowed me to see what the college level might be like.
Yes, sir.
Those things would ultimately be to my advantage later on. So it's not a question of the school saying, we don't think these kids are ready. You aren't challenging these kids. I go back to that study I said with Harvard and Yale, etc. Those kids rose to the level when you gave them the opportunity to do it. If you start off your premise by saying they can't, they never get the chance to try, you're not challenging them. I submit to you that when you challenge them, you will be shocked at how many are successful in doing so because they got the opportunity. They said, I am going to rise to the level. Young people are willing often to rise to the level if they're given that challenge. But if they're not given it, where do they ever go?
And so our challenge now is that since we know that Crystal Peoples-Stokes has this legislation there, we need to call and say we support that. This is course access legislation, which will make AP courses available to all students at every school, and so this is a critical piece of legislation. Now I'm saying that, and look, while I'm there, let me just touch on this, right? Because I'm telling you to call in support of that legislation, right? Last week, I got a call after I was on the show asking me, was I concerned because I raised the issue of some concerns about the fact that the majority leader was supporting the legalization of marijuana. And from my perspective, in terms of the people that I care about and in terms of the constituency that I'm supportive of, that wasn't a good thing. That ultimately, when you go look at the places where marijuana has been legalized what we have seen is the increase in usage among young people. I'm concerned about young people, you know what I'm saying? And then when you go look at the academic outcomes in places where marijuana is legal, we see the academic outcomes get lower. So I'm saying, listen, that's something we got to be, if we sending people to Albany to fight in our interests, I'm saying that's a red flag. We should be concerned about that, right? Mm-hmm. Somebody said, that's Crystal's, Peoples-Stokes, that's her legislation. You shouldn't be saying about that publicly. I'm like, why not? Why would not? If I support legislation, we support legislation. If we don't, we don't. You see, that's a Buffalo Buck complex again thing. Mm-hmm. You can't say something that's in opposition to an elected official. Why can't you say something if your constituency don't benefit from that? How would they know if you don't say something? Mm-hmm. So why do you think people don't want to come out and take a position that's different than quote unquote our elected officials?
So it's interesting you should say that. I wholeheartedly agree, and I think people have to be willing to separate. I support Crystal Peoples-Stokes as an example. I disagree with her on this point. To support someone does not mean that you agree with them on every position they take. I'm a Democrat. I like the Democratic platform mostly. I disagree with the Democratic platform on certain things. Here's why. I'm a person. I am not an amalgamation of what these people have come together to create. I'm Joel Moore. I've had my experiences, and that's led me to have, support this and not support that. You've got to think individually. So, again, you can support your representatives, but not support particular positions they take. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I think that's healthy for democracy.
Thank you. That is actually healthy. But in the Buffalo complex, why do you think people don't do it?
No, yeah, I think you guys are making an interesting point because I was watching this video yesterday, and the guy had made the point. He said people become too married to a specific party or a specific person, and they don't want to make their own choices. So it's interesting in a sense where if I support you, so say I support Mayor Brown, I want to vote for him. But if he raises an issue in which I adamantly disagree with, I get to say I adamantly disagree with it. You don't have to be married to somebody because you voted for them or because you support them for a specific position. And at the end of the day, what makes this thing better, what makes all of us better is because we all have our own experience.
Yes, sir.
We cannot get to the place as a community where because somebody is black, because somebody is you voted for them, you don't get to make decisions about what's going on in your community. They're an elected official who was elected to represent a constituency. If the constituency has a problem, you should be able to go to your elected official and say, hey, I voted for you, but I don't agree with what you're doing right now. That's democracy. That is literally democracy.
And the diversity of thought is going to give you a better perspective. You know what I'm saying? If we all think alike, well, somebody ain't necessary, right? So, I mean, the reality is this, so I'll give another example. I adamantly, Crystal Peoples-Stokes has a piece of legislation before the legislature right now that puts a moratorium on charter schools for Buffalo only. So a 3-year moratorium on charter school for just Buffalo. So everybody else in the whole state that can continue to have charter schools. I'm saying that, wait a minute, right now is the most important time for us to have choices for our family. You know what I'm saying? So now, I know, caller, you there, we're going to get you one second as soon as we come off this point, right? So now here we are at a point where we are coming out of pandemic, and we are in a situation where parents need to have more choices. Only Buffalo won't have more choices. We have a 3-year moratorium. So I think it's important for people who want to have choices to call Assembly Member Majority Leader Stokes and say, hey, Stokes and say, hey, listen, that don't work for us. Why is it that everybody in every other New York City, Rochester, Syracuse, why do all the other cities, their parents have choice and only Buffalo don't have choice? What is that legislation for? Now, whatever her thinking is, she shares it. At the end of the day, she's going to do whatever the majority of her constituency calls for to be done. So I support her course access legislation. I think that is great. I think you should call and say, listen, we support that. But we all have to be comfortable to be free people in America, and you don't have to be, you be afraid of saying what your position is, because your position should be unique to your experience and to your self-interest, where you're coming from. And if you don't share that, there's no way for us to progress collectively. So that's one of a Buffalo complex. You can't, speak out against the position of a particular politician. All right, we got a call on the line. Caller, are you there?
Yes. Good morning, Brother Sam.
Mother Doyle, how you doing, Dr. Doyle? Happy belated birthday.
Thank you very much. I called. I wanted to say hello to Mr. Joel Moore. He has communicated with me, and I'm so glad to hear his voice. I'm encouraging him to continue to be in the community so people can get to know him more. That's one of the reasons. And congratulations on your show, Mr. Radford. I'm glad you're counting. When I retired from my show, I had done 342 shows.
We want to be like you when we grow up. That's right.
342 shows.
Wow.
But you know what? When you count, you document history.
Yes,
so
sir.
I'm glad to see you're doing that. But I want to just say something very quickly on my experience as a teacher in the Buffalo schools. I never met a student I could not teach.
Amen.
I never met a student that could not achieve in some way, because the key for me was to always have high expectations of all students who enter my classroom.
Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to put that out there. And congratulations again, Brother Sam. And keep on counting. I'm going to keep up with you now.
All right. You just
Okay,
encouraged
thank
us.
you.
We definitely going to keep on. We try to get to 332. We like on the level that you are, Mother Doyle. Thank you so much, Mother Doyle. Again, happy belated birthday. That was a wonderful parade. Your son did a great job of honoring you last week, and we always honor the greatness and what you brought to this community as it relates to our history and our education, Mother Doyle. All right. Next caller, are you there?
Hello?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Oh, good morning. God bless y'all.
Good morning, Mother Pat. How you doing?
Team. God bless y'all. I'm listening, and first of all, I think people are they're not misunderstanding you, Sam. We can agree and disagree with something. It's nothing wrong with people disagreeing on something or another with somebody else. It's nothing personal.
Nothing personal.
So I'm the type of person, I'm like you. I mean, first of all, when they was talking about legalizing marijuana, it was okay because black people's going to jail with small amount. of marijuana. Then the mayor, when we had the dinner down there, and he got up and said, you know, okay, we're going to stop these people from doing this to these people about the small amount of marijuana. And then it was mostly, we know this is a money grab, a poverty money grab.
Say that again.
They are not trying to legalize them fentanyl and heroin that them other folks' kids is taking. A lot of black people, majority of them smoke marijuana. Legalize. It's going to affect their minds. It's going to have a total effect on our children. Now, to each his own. But the first thing when Bloomberg and you know, some of the people got together, they were saying that the plan included creating 100,000 new black-owned small business and creating 1 million new black homeowners and investing $70 billion in the nation's most disadvantaged neighborhoods. We just gonna get some of the crumbs. Y'all, ain't nobody bought no property way out there to have no place to grow this marijuana.
And what's going to happen to our kids as a result of doing that? Is that worth sacrificing our kids for?
Exactly. It's not. And I don't know, because to each his own, but I just can't see that this is about a money grab. When they shut it down the first time, it was all about, they couldn't agree on how much money was going to go here and money go there. Then they'll throw that in about the people in jail. But the mayor done put a cap on majority of that. So what's their excuse is now? They'll still try to throw that in. And get back to parents' involvement. You know, I was president of the parent group down here at MLK for a long time, before Mr. Polano, Mr. Nabin was down there. And because I was so outspoken, that was in the 90s, late 90s, Mr. Polano, he stopped me from being president of the parent group, and because there are things that I would say, and they chose somebody else. And I went to Mr. Davis, Mr. Davis, and he wrote me up a piece of paper for me to reinstate me, because Lord is the one told me. Lord Hargrave told me, he said, Pat, because you're outspoken, and what you said, Mr. Polano did not like it. You understand? People like you saying, thank God they can't shut you down. You can't be bought, and you can't be sold. Only if they would have put some intimidation on you, if they could put some intimidation on you and what you're trying to do for our kids. Everybody holler, our kids are our future. Our kids, is the next generation.
That's right.
And we don't secure their minds.
That's right.
And the social ills is part of our problem.
Let me say this, Pat.
Socialize with the marijuana, huh?
Let me say this, Pat, because you're making a real important point, right? You know, I came to MLK right after you. You know, when Mr. Polano was there, and Mr. Polano, he was the vice president of the principals union. He had the power to choose who the president was. One of the changes we made is we said, why is the principal choosing the president of the parent group?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And so after that, we made it to where every school had a parent group and only parents can vote.
Right, sure did.
You said, principals don't choose our leadership, teachers don't choose our leadership, because in PTAs, the teachers are voters, right? And so we was losing parent leaders. So now the policy 3170 of Buffalo Public School District is that the only people who vote for parent leadership are parents because of stuff like that.
Exactly. And like the Title I money, and we was sitting in a meeting, and I kept asking questions about the Title I money. And, and he told me we can do what we want to with it. But to me, they wasn't doing what they supposed to have done with some of the money. And get back to parent involvement. I'm just going to set this as an example. From the 8th grade through the 12th grade in Alabama, I never had a white teacher in my life because of the segregation.
Right.
And from the 8th grade through the 12th grade, I had to ride to school 19 miles in the morning and 19 miles back. And this was all the way up to I graduated in 68. So, I'm saying about this separate but equal stuff. I actually do believe, this is just my way that I feel. If we were separate and we could get equal resources and stuff,
yep,
we could do a whole lot of things with the social ills of our children.
Pat, listen
you got to have the heart and the real nitty-gritty with our children, not some stranger from coming out. That's why admire Brother Mario from Pastor Badger's son?
Yes.
If he just saved one. I've been listening to this young man talk about what he does as far as in the school, and he's one of a million that people can talk stuff, but I love his inspiration. So I'm going to get off this phone. But see, when you're talking about, our parents could not go to school. We had to ride 19 miles to school and 19 miles back. How's a parent going to come to school up there in them hills and in them cotton fields where I had to pick cotton and then go to school later and catch up because we was of the situation we was living on as a day labor on a white man's plantation. I'm just saying, parent involvement. If we didn't have that once upon a time. If more parents, I pray to God, I was really into it down here, and with them, with the CAO, with Bethel Head Start and the OPC. I mean, I was so excited because I never saw that before. And once parents come out and get involved with this, their mind and start thinking it as a burden to be involved in your kids' education. Go to the parent meeting. Listen to what saying say. I mean, meet up with these people. Get your heart and your mind. Our children, listen. I don't want to get no personal attack. I'm just trying to encourage people what must be done, what we couldn't do, we can do it now, and parents got to get more involved. God bless y'all. Keep on the I can preach a sermon, but God. Okay.
Amen.
Bye-bye.
But God, you know what I'm saying? But you make a really important point. You know, and I'm curious you said something earlier, Joel, that I want to bring in right here, right? Because right now what we got is, 75% of our kids who don't read on grade level, 80% who don't do math on grade level. Are you telling me that if we were educating our own kids in our own community, we couldn't do that? I mean, at the end of the day, I would suggest that 25% of the kids are gonna get by on their own work anyway, just because who their parents are, because who their brothers and sisters are, the neighborhood. They 25% of the kids is getting themselves through for all practical purposes because of other conditions. I'm suggesting that I think the 75% that are not learning, who are not learning at pace on grade level, it should be a crisis in our community, and your generation has to really jump up and make that a priority. You was making an interesting point about growth factor.
So we were talking about growth earlier, and the background to this is there's several ways that you can look at success in a school district. Oftentimes you guys hear the debates about standardized testing and the pushback on standardized testing as an inadequate way to evaluate students. Another way that people look at it is the growth rate. And what that is determining basically on a national level where people stand about third grade, and then taking a look some years later, typically 5 years, so let's say 8th grade, as to where people stand and seeing what the growth rate was in between. So I did some research before the show, and one thing I found, for instance, in Chicago, you had third graders who were below, on average, the national level in terms of standardized testing. Mm-hmm. They had accelerated growth for whatever reason, so that by 8th grade, they had grown not 5 years, but 6 years inside that time frame.
Wow.
Now, in contrast, we looked at Buffalo and we looked at Rochester. And I want to point these out, obviously sister cities. What we saw not only was Buffalo below the standard national level with regard to performance in the third grade level, they've regressed in Buffalo and Rochester such that instead of growing 5 years, they had only grown 4 years, I believe is it. And so you have to unpack these things. You have to say, why is that happening? Now, economics is one. We are some of the poorest cities in the nation. We know that.
Yeah, Buffalo and Rochester is number 2 and 3.
Rochester was 2.9 years.
Wow.
2.9 years. Buffalo was 4. There is something going on in Western New York, family, and we have got to get to the bottom of what is happening, but you can bet this much. The results are the function of the way the system is operating, right? You know that you have to alter the system to get a different output, which means we need to understand how the system works, and we need to see what on the ground level is affecting these children in this way. But the numbers
I think people
should
should know that your background is you an attorney, but you're also an engineer. You know what I'm saying? So when you say you have to alter the system to get a different output, you're not just saying that in general. I mean, be more precise about that.
Mm-hmm. So my background from Howard is chemical engineering, and numbers matter to me because numbers tell a story. And numbers tell a story in a way that a human being often doesn't, because numbers have less bias unless they've been altered, right? So when we look at the numbers, we can definitively say, hopefully from an objective perspective, what's going on. Think about that. 2.9 years of progress in a 5-year period going on in Rochester. That's almost a 50% slower rate than the national average. Again, 4 years of progression out of 5, that's a 80% rate as opposed to the national average. We are underperforming, and systems do what you set them up to do. Let's be real about that, guys.
Systems do what you set them up to do. So if you're getting that 80% of your kids can read on grade level and 75% can do math on grade level, that's because the system is producing that outcome.
Mm-hmm. So when you all look at it, at some point, let's say you make an adjustment to a system, right? That first year, 2, whatever, you can see how it affects the system. At that point, you have to accept the system for doing what you set it up to do. It is incumbent upon you to then go back and alter another variable to change the system if you don't like the output, or continue it. And here's what the point I want to make on that. There's 2 different groups evaluating the system. The system is working well for a certain portion of the group, right? And so they're saying, I don't want to alter the system at all. City honors, you all are doing an excellent job. But let's be real with ourselves. You're a particular group of individuals that likes the output of the system, and you are concerned that any adjustment will affect what's going on with your particular students. I want your students to perform at the level that they're performing. I love that.
Not at the expense of mine.
Not at the expense of mine. I want all of the students to be performing at that level, or at the very least be given an opportunity to do so. And so again, guys, you have to look at the holistic system. The reason there is a Buffalo complex, to your point, is because you have smaller factions concerned about what's good for them. You have unions concerned about what's good for them. You have middle class and upper class individuals who are concerned about what's good for them. But what you have to understand is Buffalo cannot move in smaller groups. Either you move the entire system and you get a success rate for the entire system, or you don't. The Buffalo complex exists because we are not educating the majority of people who are going to stay here for the next generation. If you don't educate the third graders aren't going anywhere. Well, where they're going is they're adults now, right? They're adults in that same system. So when you say, why are we still one of the poorest cities? It's because we didn't take the time up front to educate the individuals who could have made us not the poorest city.
Listen, I first of all, you welcome on this show anytime, right? Because literally, that's what I'm saying every week, except I'm usually screaming and hollering. You said in a very controlled, very, mild-mannered, straightforward way, this is the math. This is the objective analysis of this. This ain't emotional. It ain't personal. It's just what the numbers say. And if we don't change something, we're going to keep getting these same results. So I'm trying to scream and holler to get people's attention, saying, listen, everybody, this is happening by design, and we're participating in it. If we don't do something to force the system to change, to do something different, our kids are going to suffer. They already took their kids out. 80% of the teachers live in the suburbs. They don't live in the city of Buffalo. Their kids are not affected by what they're doing. So when they make decisions in their best interest, it don't affect their children. So they affect our children. So if we don't say nothing, we get the consequences. So I really appreciate that. You want to make a comment?
I think the point that Joel made, especially about, Mr. Harris says it all the time, the children who come out the system are our responsibility as a community. So if we're not educating them properly, they become our burden in the community. And then one thing we have to realize is, if this system has been failing for so long, the parents of the children have also been failed by the system. So now in one household, you have a parent who can't read, write, and do math on grade level, who has a child who that parent cannot turn around and help get through the system because they themselves didn't benefit from the system. So now we have one house with generations of people who the system have failed. But the bigger point to make that I totally agree with is you have this small group of people who the system works for controlling the whole system.
That's it.
And so now they paint this picture as if the system works because they are benefit. And what happens a lot in the African American community is people get in that group and they start going along to get along. They get in that group, and instead of turning around and saying, how can I pull everybody up? They say, oh, well my child can go to City Honors now, so y'all on your own. I made enough money where I can move out to the suburbs. y'all on your own. And so now the system in which these people have come through and have succeeded, they don't turn around and try to affect it because it's worked for them. Can you imagine, like, having a school system where 75% of the children cannot read and do math on grade level? If we were talking about anything else, we would be yelling and screaming. What if your car worked 25% of the time? Who would let that happen and not be mad about it?
You say that system working 25% of the time wouldn't work for nobody.
And so now we have this thing where when we make noise about the school system failing our children, people say, no, it's okay, we're getting better. How can we say it's getting better when children cannot read, write, and do math on grade level? And when they become adults, they can't get jobs to help themselves because I'm just stopping.
And they're becoming adults every day. We see with the situation that took place over at Northland, where you had all these kids. They told us over at Northland, 25%, only 25% of the people who come there with high school diplomas actually can pass the TABE test to be able to get into the program to do advanced.
And then think about the number of children who graduate high school and then have to go to college and take remedial courses.
There you go.
So now you are taking courses that does nothing for you to graduate, but you're wasting a year of college paying for these remedial courses.
Tap and Pell.
This is really interesting, guys. When you you've got to look at the system. So you start out doing the analysis in third grade, and you know you're behind. And then between third grade and eighth grade, you don't see the progression that you should, and you're still behind. Now, fast forward to what you just said. They have to take these tests to get these jobs when they graduate, right? So we know the system. We know before they're born, the system already 18, 19 years down the line is going to require them to be at a certain level in order to get the jobs that are available for them to succeed. But we know that they won't be able to do it because we've got all these markers in between that says they're not on pace to be where we need them to be to perform at a certain level in the system that's set up. The entire thing is laid out for us for Buffalo to be what it is in some respects. And this is my hometown. I'm not knocking it, but you have to challenge it in order to grow it. So this is where I come from, a place of love when I say this. But this is predictable. This system is operating, again, the way it was set up to. And if we don't start changing variables, we don't have to wonder what's going to happen. What's going to happen for my group is what happened for the group ahead of me and what happened for the group ahead of them. The system is going to continue to work like it is set up to work.
And so when you hear people say, okay, we don't want to take standardized testing, right? They say they don't want to take standardized testing because they don't want people to know that data but they don't say we don't want to have a test to become a teacher, right? So I'm going to have to take a test to become a teacher. I'm going to have to take a test to become a lawyer. I'm going to have to take a test to get in any profession, right? So why would you not have them take standardized testing during the process? Because you don't want people to see how bad they're performing so you can wait till they get to the college or wait till they get to their profession and then let us know then. We know now that they're not performing, so we can talk about it now. Mm-hmm. So one of the other interesting data points is that we looked at, there was a group of Head Start students that they followed. And they saw that when the Head Start students were coming into Buffalo Public School System, they were 1 and 2 grade levels ahead. By the time the Head Start kids got to third grade, they were a grade level behind. They said, how did that happen? And they said, when they followed it, they essentially said that when students show up to school and they know how to count and they do their numbers, they know how to do math, and they focus on the kids that don't. So those kids who are ahead don't get focused on, and so then they get normed. They get come down to where the other kids are at, and then because they're not engaged in the process, they actually regress. So by the time they get to third and fourth grade, Head Start students are a year behind, and they come in a year or two ahead. So we got to come up with a way to address that in the system.
Mm-hmm. Saying that, you see this dynamic. We all go to school. So when you have the smart kids in school, teachers pay less attention to them. But what also happens in turn is they don't feel challenged. And when you don't feel challenged as a child, you find other things to do. You start talking, you start misbehaving, because the teacher isn't giving you anything to challenge your thinking or to keep you moving at the pace you're on. So now we follow these Head Start kids to kindergarten, first, second grade, where teachers, he can do his numbers. Oh, he got his letters. Go sit over there, Tommy. I got to focus on this child because they can't. And so now this child suffers, and they stop the progression they're on because they're not getting the same attention and the same focus that they need.
I think it's an excellent point, but I want to make, in fairness to the arguments, I want to make a point here. So we're saying that the kids who are performing well don't get paid so much attention because there's other kids and they're trying to bring them up to level. That arguably is a promotion of this two-tier system, right? Where you say, all right, if you got these advanced kids, you've got to separate them to make sure they continue to develop it well. And so there's someone out here listening to us right now that's screaming, but you guys said you didn't want the two-tier system. But ultimately, what we want is the kids to develop at their level.
Yes.
If they've got we want everyone to be able to develop. And I understand it's a very complicated thing with a lot of different variables. But we don't want our kids who are advanced to discontinue advancing. We also want our kids who aren't so advanced to have some growth.
Yeah.
And that holistic movement is what we want.
And I think with this hub model and these learning hubs and these pods is a way to address that. I think that coming out of this pandemic, we're in a position to address that like we've never been. Because now we see different models of education. We see people who are able to learn remotely, who are self-paced, who can learn with their support of their parents. We see people who learn with a little bit of support and hybrid. We see people who need to be in school. And so we got a whole experience. And so next week we're going to have Dr. Dia Bryant on here who's going to talk to us about the fact that we got $245 million of money coming into the city of Buffalo. And we got to make sure that that money that's coming from the stimulus is actually spent on making sure our kids advance. We don't take that money and just give teachers raises and don't do anything to impact the people who are most affected by being in remote instruction.
Yeah, and I just want to piggyback on this point because the issue becomes, although a child may be advanced in one area, that don't mean they're advanced in everything.
Right.
So what happens a lot of times is school is a whole experience. You get social experience and you get academic experiences. So what happens is just because a child is super good at math, they may struggle in reading. So this is what we're talking about when we want the education system to work for our children, because every child may need something different. So in math class, if your child may be on second grade level, they may need to go to a second grade class for math, but
That's
come
right.
back for reading.
Right.
So it's really taking this approach where every child matters and the way we educate them is tailored to them because we want all of them to advance.
Yes, and we was actually supposed to have Damone was supposed to be on today, talking a little bit about bringing additional resources, and so hopefully Damone will be on next week, and he'll talk about bringing additional resources into this community. Another thing, just as this last point before we go, I heard the school board meeting, they had this big debate about the speed cameras, what I thought was really interesting all over again, right? But they made an interesting point. They said the speed cameras was justified because they were the kids were accidents and kids weren't safe. But then they made the point that the speed cameras no speed cameras are in places where there were accidents at. The speed cameras are not in the places where the kids are in danger at. So here we are, we got this money grab to get these speed cameras, and the system does not actually address what it was designed to address. But again, what we want to do is talk about this Buffalo complex. Why are things going on in Buffalo that don't go on in another place, and what we can do to make them better, and what your generation can do to make them better. Joe, we got only a minute left. Anything you want to say as we get ready to go?
I want to say that, again, there are these big challenges that we have, but we need to piecemeal this analysis and make incremental steps. I understand that some of these things seem overwhelming sometimes, but the best way to go about an overwhelming project is to take incremental steps in the right direction. It adds up over time. So guys, don't be so discouraged. Make one positive step in the right direction, and then make a commitment to make another step after that, and we'll be moving in the right direction.
Well, Joe, we appreciate your voice. Man, listen, join us anytime that you want to. We really appreciate you. I mean,
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Oh, listen up, everybody. If you want to be part of the We the Parent movements, go to www.caowny We the Parents. And you can put in an application, be part of the We the Parents. You can call us at 332-3773. And as we leave, we say every week, power to the parents.